Welcome to Intuitive Astrology with Molly McCord. Thank you so much for joining me today as we're going to continue our discussion on mundane astrology, as this will be a part 2 to the topic, and we will further examine the mundane astrology of Jupiter and Chiron, plus the Sun and all of the personal planets, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. And this is to help assist you in interpreting astrology through this lens. And some of you had asked about the name mundane astrology. Well, it comes from the Latin word mundus, which means world. So mundane translates to world, therefore this is world astrology, and it is one of many niche areas of astrology. As I previously mentioned, I don't typically incorporate mundane astrology into my regular work or offerings, although I have done it at times. For example, on my YouTube channel, I have a full playlist for you going through the energetics of that Pluto return that occurred through the US over the course of a number of years as Pluto and Capricorn moved back and forth across 27 degrees of Capricorn. And so that playlist discusses the energetics of how the US would be permanently transforming after that Pluto return. I've also done some other topics for you about mundane astrology, world astrology, discussing what lies ahead in order to help you prepare for world changes. Back in December 2018, I did a few podcasts for you on how the world would permanently change in January 2020 with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, and that was highly accurate and beneficial information for many people because you had over a year to prepare for what was coming in 2020. So I hope that the information in this show assists you in seeing these trends and recognizing them in the astrology of our times. So let's look at the significance of Jupiter in mundane astrology. Jupiter is the biggest planet in our solar system, and it's associated with growth, expansion, wisdom, higher education, philosophy, ideologies. It's how we see the world at large, and it also supports us in feeling positive and abundant in our own life and in our own growth trajectory. So when we look at Jupiter through the lens of mundane astrology, it's going to amplify these themes of growth and development, as well as accentuate the belief systems, spiritual basis, cultural practices, and religion that may be associated with a particular country, city, region, business, company, or anything that mundane astrology is being used to analyze. So Jupiter pertains to religion, travel, ceremonies, legal matters, celebrations. It's also connected to propaganda and what has been overly exaggerated, or what messages are being relentlessly communicated in order to get people to believe something. So the use of Jupiter can be manipulated and is something that is meant to be evaluated with discernment, because Jupiter can make things too good to be true. It's also overproduction, which is especially applicable in any manufacturing business or the development of certain products and services of any kind, where is this being overly used? Is there too much of this? You can relate Jupiter to supply and demand issues as well. Jupiter can be that go big or go home energy for a country or business. And so it does bring in risk-taking and gambling, feeling like this is going to work out in my favor. I'm ready to go for this. We should grow in this way. Of course, that can be accurate and that can lead to beneficial developments. But depending on the placement of Jupiter, there can be a realization of, oh, this is too much. We've gone too far. We didn't assess the reality of taking this risk or gambling on this. So of course that also relates to lotteries. And I'm thinking about here in the US state lotteries and how they're used to generate income. And then they have these huge Powerball payoffs, or something is given to a winner. But there have been investigations into those lotteries to look at how the money is dispensed and how it's really being used or who it's really going to. So again, with Jupiter, not everything is real. It can be propaganda and it can be a detrimental energy too, which we don't often think of Jupiter as, but of course it can hold that energy signature because Jupiter is about foreign travel, international travel, going to new places, exploring new realms. Jupiter also signifies the willingness to expand in the world, to go farther. This means it can also bring up the themes of other cultures, religions, and belief systems that are welcomed into a country or into a culture, specifically like a business culture. It can pertain to those who are from another land, who are visiting, and who are bringing in new information to an institution, a country, a city. Jupiter rules law, the courts, judiciary systems, clergymen, and religion, as I mentioned. And so these are often individuals that hold some type of honor in society. They are looked up to, they are believed to hold truth and benevolence. They can be seen as generous and wise. But again, as with all things related to Jupiter, we have to be discerning about someone's true character and true intentions. This is where things can be overly stated on a resume to state that someone has more experience than they really have or more knowledge than they really have. And speaking of knowledge, Jupiter relates to universities, professors, colleges, and college exams that need to be completed in order to move on into one's occupation. Jupiter can bring about good luck as well. Things are easier. You're gifted in certain areas, or a country or business is able to do something more effortlessly. It just comes together and there's innate support for what they are offering, doing, or selling. So Jupiter is often an important energy to examine because it does show where things are going to be easier, where there will be more affluence and abundance, as well as how to make the most of what appears and use it wisely. So just a few things that Jupiter is associated with. Then I want to touch on Chiron. Now, in the previous episode, we discussed Saturn because Saturn is actually traveling with Neptune at this time. So I felt that that was a natural link in to the topic, but I did skip Chiron in last Monday's episode. So Chiron in Mundane Astrology reveals where there is a lack, vulnerability, or weakness. So for example, within a country, it shows where a country doesn't have access to certain resources, certain needs. And so there's a vulnerability there that might guide them to establish certain trade agreements or import-export regulations to assist with where they're weak. So if a country has Chiron in Taurus, for example, they might not have natural resources from the land. They might not have agriculture or gold or the ability to harvest from the earth. So they have to establish relations with other countries that do in order to import what they need. I'm actually thinking of countries that have to create multiple trade agreements in order to support their population and to get what they need. You can also relate this to, for example, if a country has Chiron in Virgo. Virgo would be related to admin and support systems, workers, skilled workers, because in Virgo, there's often a niche or specialty that is focused in on. And so if a country or business has Chiron in Virgo, then there would be a lack of those who have that skill set, and they might have to seek it elsewhere or go abroad, even for cheaper services or to find those skilled laborers and then bring them into a country in order for them to live and work where their skill set is lacking. So that Chiron energy also shows where there is a wound or a vulnerability, where a business isn't going to feel as strong in itself. And there's a need then to look for support and ask for it. And that's true for all Chiron energies, is that it's where we feel that we can't handle it ourselves. So we seek out others for guidance, support, and energetic assistance in some form. So wherever Chiron might be, it's going to highlight this is where you actually can't do it alone. You're going to need to make a request or ask, and even asking could feel vulnerable because then you're revealing a weak spot. But this is what Chiron shows in mundane astrology. It can also show what is unhealed within the consciousness of a culture, society, or population. It can show where there is a joint perceived weakness or injury. This is also where there can be collective trauma. And I know that there are places on the planet that are holding some deep wounds, deep fears, and those are highly active right now. There's a lack of safety. There's a lack of not knowing if they're going to be okay and can rest. And so this would be a Chiron trauma. Chiron is related to abuse, harm, injury, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities. Chiron can also be very important to understand after a traumatic situation. I think of Chiron relating directly to veterans who come home after war, and they have been permanently changed by those experiences, and now they are holding those energies, the PTSD being very real, and they need support, they need care in order to heal and move away from the energies that they have been subjected to and exposed to. So Chiron can show, again, a collective trauma. It can show where there are weaker energies that need healing. Chiron can then also reveal where there are going to be healers who arrive to take care of that issue. And so whether those are healers within a population or healers abroad, this can be where the healing is needed because there's a need for this level of repair. And so what's cool about mundane astrology, I think, is that it all makes sense, right? It's like, oh, of course, that would make sense around Chiron in a country's chart or Chiron in a business. That's where that business is weak. And that could even be a department in the business where there is less trust, less reliability, even more turnover. So all of this can be quite fascinating to analyze in a mundane astrology chart. So now let's go to the sun in mundane astrology, which is, of course, the biggest light in our solar system and is always one of the most significant energies in any chart. And so in mundane astrology, we look at the sun as those who are in charge. This could be the ruler, the authority figure, the central figure, those who have power and will, those who are in charge. This can be a head executive, a president, the leader who is taking on the energy of this chart. So when you're looking at mundane astrology, you look to the sun to see, okay, how is this energy going to be led? How is it going to grow? How is the sun placement going to be amplified with a certain level of consciousness that exudes an energy that directs the will, intentions, and goals of that entity? And by entity, I mean either the business, company, city, what have you. The sun will signify success. And what are the main issues that the leader needs to work with in order to be successful? There can be strong ego energy here, strong individuality ego. This is where a leader can be disconnected from the people and take on something and assume this is mine. I don't have to worry about others. We would know that as a very out of touch and unconscious leader, to put it in a nice way. But this is where the leader is actually responsible for the collective, and the collective shows up as the moon, the public. I'll get to that in a moment. But the leader is the one who actually has to have the consciousness to see who they are in charge of and responsible for, who they are leading and why. So the sun becomes very important in any mundane astrology chart. It directly relates to how someone uses that willpower. If they have vitality and determination, how would you describe the leader is based on the sun, and the sun being the main energy source in our solar system. It means that the sun is also a central figure here. It's a main character, literally, that determines the course of where things will go and what will unfold. So the sun is always important to analyze. The sun also will relate to, in general, masculine energy, just as the moon in general relates to feminine energy. Now, it's never just that simple, but I do want to paint this in broad terms so that you can see how the astrology might be more applicable in some situations. Also, the sun is connected to gold. The moon is connected to silver, just as a random aside, but also can be useful to understand in a chart. The sun is also what brings about recognition, how you are seen. It relates to your level of confidence and your abilities. It's highlighting who are we. So in a company, this would define who we are as a company based on first the sun and the energy it permeates. Now, if a sun in the chart is not well placed, it would signify an identity crisis, not knowing who we are, where we're going, what we're doing, a sense of what needs to be built and developed, how are we showing up, what leads us to success. And this is where the sun is going to bring about the lessons that are needed to develop greater clarity in the present and the future. The sun is always direct, just like the moon. So these are two areas of life that are always meant to be moving forward for a company or business. And it's understanding that leadership here is central to the success of where we're going. And so there could be issues that come up that have to address the self-image of a company. If there is a public relations crisis, if there is an issue in not understanding what you're producing, what you're doing, that could be related to the sun. There could be feelings of inferiority. We're not good enough. We're not the best. We're not working hard enough. And in some cases, there could be a lack of desire, a lack of self-definition, and a disconnect from the healthy ego. So as with all things in an astrology chart, there's multiple ways to interpret it, but these are some of the main themes of the sun. And so as the sun highlights those who run the show and who are in charge, then we move to the moon. And the moon is very important in mundane astrology because it represents the people, families, homes, the public, those who are affected by the leadership of the sun, those who feel it and sense it, and those who are in some way dependent upon that leader for their own needs, safety, and security. And so the moon is connected to the mass population, crowds, the general public, your overall client base and customers, as well as the public perception and attitude towards the leader or towards the sun. The moon is Main Street. It's your everyday businesses, everyday interactions. It's the people who are in often your local environment, but just people that you're around and most likely share space with, since the moon is comfort, domestic themes, where you go at the end of the day, where you call home, what home means to you. It also reflects privacy, the level of privacy that's granted to each person or perhaps not granted to them. The moon also relates to sensitive matters, things that are more personal and private, that may not be openly disclosed. The moon connects to what fluctuates and changes in society, in a home, in a business. It highlights where there will be passing trends, instinctual feelings, something moving in and flowing out. It's where change happens more regularly. The moon is also then how we respond to those needs and those changes. It relates to being more receptive, trusting, open. It can be where we feel a sense of, this feels good to me, this feels accurate, this feels true. This is where people will place loyalty in a company or business, and they'll say, well, I love being here because it feels like a family. I feel safe. I've been working here for 3 decades because of XYZ. So this is where the moon will reveal those who stay in a country, space, or business for the long term, because it directly relates to how they feel and the satisfaction and needs that are met through that moon or lunar energy. The moon in a mundane chart relates, as I said, to families, women, pregnancies, fertility, nourishment, and the value placed on feelings and emotions. The moon will also highlight how the past is viewed, if there is respect for previous generations, for other rituals, or from where we came from. The past could be something that's highly revered, depending on the moon sign, where there is an honor and tradition that is carried forward across generations and across legacies. The moon is also going to highlight where we came from that has a sense of perhaps even melancholy with it, but there could also be celebration of who has lived here, who our great ancestors are, the wise people who came before us, or how you would even define your ancestors and lineage. So the moon is much more personal in any chart, but it signifies how we feel about a business, company, country, or culture that isn't readily seen or even noticed. So then we move on to the next planet, which is Mercury. And so Mercury in mundane astrology is very busy, as you would guess. Mercury is all about communications, news, intelligence gathering, transportation, and vehicles. It's about where you go in your community to take care of errands, including local businesses, the post office, the grocery store, cafes and bars and happy hours and hanging out. It's gathering and getting together with those who live near you. Mercury relates directly to books, speech, magazines, what you're scrolling on your phone, how information is being passed on. Mercury prefers logic and reason and is all about learning and understanding more, especially if there is a desire to advance or become more skilled in something. Mercury relates to business and commerce and how business is conducted, perhaps the practices, the traditions that are expected, and even the expectations of how a business can perform or succeed is through Mercury, because Mercury is about what you communicate and share, especially with your customers, clients, and the public. And so a strong Mercury is how you're going to demonstrate your value, your benefits, what you offer. Mercury is how you announce sales. It is your sales and marketing department. It's how you communicate when there's a 50% off. If you hang a big banner in the store window or you take out Facebook ads, that's your Mercury, is how you advertise and share what you offer and what you do. And so in a country's chart, Mercury is also how information is communicated to the public, what is revealed and what is not, what is said and what is not. So that Mercury can be quite interesting to look at because there can be duplicity with Mercury. Mercury is known for having that duplicitous nature. Of course, it depends on the chart, but it's saying one thing to one side of the room and saying something totally different to the other side of the room. That's also Mercury. So this is where we have to hone in on the energetics and trust our intuition when something feels off, it doesn't make sense, I don't think this is the full story, what is not being expressed or said, what is not being fully communicated, what is being hidden. And so all of that pertains to how Mercury expresses itself in a chart. Mercury relates to, as I said, vehicles and transportation, how you get around town. It is your driver's license and your training, as well as documents and mail. Mercury will reflect the intelligence and mental state of a population or of employees. Mercury will reveal if there is a lot of anxiety or stress in an environment. It will reveal what people need in order to understand what's going on. Mercury is about our intellect and our personal expression. It also relates to rumors, gossip, news, false statements, false narratives, and again, all that going back to what is being communicated and said. At a personal level, Mercury relates to young people. It's connected to primary education and school systems that help people get a general education. In a business, it can reveal where more ongoing training is needed. It would include presentations, public speaking, what is being taught, and where ongoing development is needed. Mercury relates to writers, authors, teachers, and merchants, those who need to use their intellect for a living, those who make money from their communication, business, and commerce skills. Of course, Mercury can be many other things depending on the sign and house it's in a chart, but these are just general understandings of each planet. So now let's move on to Venus. We'll cover Venus and Mars next. And Venus relates to social affairs and harmony, pleasure, affection, love, sharing, decoration. Venus is how a space is designed in order to feel a certain way or to be presented in a certain way. So Venus would relate to the interior decoration of a business. It relates to how people get along, how they enjoy each other or not. It's about the relationships that are developed within a space, how people learn to enjoy one another and have things in common. Venus brings about festivities, joy and fun. It's where you can go and hang out with your coworkers after work. It's how birthdays or other celebrations are acknowledged. Venus is also about what is valued in a space, what is valued in a country or company. And so it highlights this is how we come together based on those shared values. So consider if you're in a space that doesn't have the same values as you, you're not going to feel a strong connection to it. And Venus is about connections. She's about the relational dynamics that are in play. And so this is where you'll also find that some people tend to resonate more strongly with certain values, and those are different than perhaps your values. Venus is about money, finances, and banking. It's about the general overall financial health and well-being of a business or company. It's how money is made because there's a belief that what we are doing is worth it. We are worthy of this price point or of selling services at this financial point. It's establishing the money that will be made and the money that will be accumulated. So Venus can highlight where there is great wealth, luxury, decadence, where things are meant to be more higher end or more low end. And I mean that with respect in terms of, well, if we have a price point that's a little bit lower, we're going to reach more people. And so the Venus energy, of course, could be expressed in many different ways, but it's essentially the self-value and self-worth of an entity and how that is then expressed to the public and communicated through Mercury to those who would be interested in what you're offering. Venus is about, as I said, decor, decorations, gifts, flowers, perfume, anything that activates the five senses. This can also be music, performance, dance, self-expression that is designed to bring people together and to be enjoyed. Venus relates directly to young women, just as Mars relates directly to young men. So just some generalities here to understand. Venus is about the feminine qualities and values within a system, within a culture, what is prized, what is appreciated, what is needed. Venus relates directly to what the feminine desires and where those interests may lie. Venus will also bring about what we enjoy and how we incorporate that into our world. This would be the companies that always have something fun going on Fridays, Friday being the day of Venus. This would be where there's a natural need to do things together that we enjoy. This is where the company determines, well, we'll just buy baseball tickets for 50 people and you can all go to the baseball game together on Saturday night. So Venus ultimately wants to bring people together, seeks harmony, cohesion, tranquility, and ease. Venus in a chart is going to show you the level of happiness and satisfaction that is truly being felt within the collective. So then let's move on to Mars. And Mars, as you would guess, is going to be very different than Venus because Mars is about how we go for what we want. What are our goals? What are we looking to accomplish? And how do we get there? How do we take action? How do we compete? A strong Mars in mundane astrology can be a business or country that will always be more assertive or aggressive, that can perhaps stir up conflicts, triggers, and disputes in the name of assertion and in their drive to accomplish. This can be very overactive ego energy. This Mars can come across as being heavily focused on winning at all costs, always being number one, and getting rid of the competition. It can be very cutthroat depending on the placement and energies of Mars. Now, Mars can relate directly to our passion. What are we passionate about? And because we're passionate, we take action on it. There can be a lot of energy here with this Mars, and it can be healthy or unhealthy. It can be strong, healthy ego determination, or it can be highly self-involved and selfish egoic energy. There's courage with Mars. There's a sense of accomplishment. We can do it. Let's get there. Let's make it happen. It is an enterprising energy that can desire to go out and get something done on one's own. That does depend, of course, on the Mars placement. There can also be, of course, violence, war, a fighting spirit. Mars is about weapons, arson, guns, explosions, accidents. It is about criminals and those who are dishonest as well. Mars in a chart will relate to young men, as I mentioned. It can relate to soldiers, athletes, those who are skilled in a particular type of training. This is often your nation's Olympic competitors, those who go to the Olympic Games to compete in their athletic mastery. Because Mars can also inflame, this is where there can be more fevers, infections, anger, rage, inflammation, and highly reactive energies. When Mars is not responsible, mature, or self-aware, Mars will be more extreme in the expressions of how it operates and what it gets done. I find that Mars is also really important to look at in terms of how it relates to the sun in a chart, because Mars and the sun together can be very high-powered and energized. But if that's overboard, that can be too aggressive, too extreme, and bring about ultimately some big crashes, because that Mars energy can be very explosive at times. And when it's unconscious, that will lead to some perhaps even fatal consequences and events. Mars in a healthy manner is going to help a business or company move ahead and see what needs to be taken care of and to take it on. It's how we face conflict. It's how we understand that we're not the only ones on the playground. This can be wonderful for looking at how can we improve ourselves? How can our business or our country be better? How can we utilize the strength of this Mars to become even more skilled and accomplished for what we do and what we're known for? And a healthy Mars is actually looking to improve oneself without trying to destroy another. So there can be a level of healthy competition where you see what another is doing and you realize, well, I'm going to improve myself by using the resources I have available and what comes naturally to me to be the best version of myself. And this is how Mars can be fulfilling and also feel like it has a purpose. Mars does need to have a purpose. Otherwise, it's out there in the parking lot spinning its wheels at midnight and painting graffiti on the walls because it has too much energy and nowhere to responsibly direct it. So Mars in a chart is going to show you where people lash out, where they have some big things they want to move or do or get off their chest. It's where there can be unresolved anger. It's where conflict could either be dealt with or avoided. And that would be something to look at in the Mars, because some signs are good at handling conflict and disagreements, and other signs will ignore it or avoid it, try and sweep it under the rug, and then before you know it, that's a really big rug because every issue has been put underneath it. So Mars in a chart is important to understand, especially as it relates to all these other planets, because it's how energies can be very unconscious and how they're expressed. But once it's seen and known, then it can be useful, tamed, and highly productive in moving towards goals and a purpose. So there is my rundown for you of planets and energies in mundane astrology, how to understand what's going on in the world at large or within a company or business, how to get to the heart of something that maybe has been overlooked or just not even recognized. But this is one of the ongoing gifts of astrology, is that it does provide another layer of understanding, helps you tap in to what is going on and to be aware of it. Also helps play to one's strength, to allow a business to be more prosperous, to work with the timing of the energies, and to see how a country, business, or company is here to prosper in its own unique way. So as always, thank you so much for joining me for this podcast episode. I hope you have enjoyed this topic. I do find that mundane astrology is really awesome. So many cool things to look at and be aware of. And of course, just one more tool for us to understand these big times that we're in. As always, I'll be back on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays for a new podcast episode. So thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon. Take good care.